I think a lot of material down there. What we'll do is we'll take questions in groups of 3, and then we go by a couple of rounds. So can we have the first round? Please identify yourself, so then the speaker will know maybe where you're coming from. So can we have the first round of questions? Saido?
Thank you, General, for the presentation. Well, you started by telling the caveat that in this presentation you're using any use of violence, whether it's an insurgency form or terrorism form, as the same. Maybe you did that for convenience purpose. But is the Indian state's definition and therefore response, and in particular, say the security establishment, is the response, is the definition of terrorism and insurgency one of the same? And do they respond to these two things in the similar manner? And the second question is, you pose to us the idea that a lot of recruits into the ISIS from the Western world is coming from a perceived idea of persecution, whether real or not. In India, we have a new government where a lot of the actions will be perceived by minorities, particularly the Islam group, to be of a persecutorial nature. So, what are your views in this regard?
Can we get maybe sir, you want to answer?
Yeah, correct.
Silo first.
Yeah, actually, definitely, I didn't want to get into the definition issue of terrorism because, one man's terrorist and another man's freedom fighters issue. So I frankly speaking. But terrorism is a means. It's a methodology. It's always been the way by which the weaker guy always got to the bigger guy. And that's the historical thing. So you actually, the insurgency, whereas, when you define an insurgency, obviously it is a mass movement amongst the people. So an insurgent can use what the government would describe as terroristic method, because he actually uses violence not only against the state itself but against innocent civilian population and tries to intimidate through the use of violence. So that's the definition of the issue. Whether the new government actually, too early to tell. Too early to tell. This is an apprehension which is being voiced in India, is whether the new government, under it's a rightist government, it is a government which has a former RSS Pracharak as its prime minister. It's got, for the first time, the RSS, which is at one time a banned organization in the country, responsible for the death of the father of the nation, is now in power with a very sizable majority of seats in parliament. I mean, it's an unusual situation for India itself. So the question is, will this government actually follow what is called the Hindu majoritarian agenda? It's a fear. It's a fear which has been freely voiced in a lot of debate. In India being a country where actually nobody keeps quiet about anything, there are signs which we are not very sure whether we can wake up our mind too early, because from May to now, I think just a couple of months down the line, some people would say there are worrying signs, because there have been worrying signs in certain instigations of communal riots and so on. But there's an Indian election which has already taken place. We don't know whether we're aimed only at the elections. We really don't know how this government is going to deal with it. But let me tell you that the Indian state will not tolerate it. And Modi and his political party has not been elected because of their ideological moorings, not because they carried a Hindu agenda, as much that people wanted development. It was the price rise and the lack of employment which has put Modi there. He's come to power on a development agenda, not on an ideological agenda. Ideological agenda obviously will be there for people for whom that matters, but really that is not the prime case. But if he knows it, that if he tries anything to do that, because that's basically it goes against the idea of India itself. They would the political reaction to it would be hardly negative. So I don't think they would go down that route, and I hope they won't.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Sir, correct me if I have misunderstood. 7% of the 185 million Muslims, are you saying that I vote ISA, or 7% of...
7%. 7. They- 7 people.
7 people. Sorry.
My God.
Is there any way to stop these people, more people going there? Is there any measure by the government or any step that you have taken?
I told you, the measure by the government is actually to get the leaders of Muslim societies to make their children understand what it means to be part of that state. That's the measure. The government is not probably doing anything else. Of course, the intelligence agencies must be monitoring, but that's part of normal governance. But as far as the government is concerned, it's the Muslim leadership who has been told that you need to make your constituencies understand what it means to join a state like that, and make sure that your young men don't go back. But young men actually can get swayed just by the smallest of incidents. I mean, that we know. But the very fact that we only have 7 people goes means they must be speaking something about India itself. And those people who went there, the 7 guys, who reported they've gone there? Their parents. Their parents came to the police and said that their children had gone actually to visit the holy shrines in Karbala. Then they never came back. But who reported them? The parents. So they were not from radicalized families. They were radicalized individually. They have not been able to find out where these people got radicalized. That's another process which is going on. How they got radicalized. But apparently they got radicalized. Today you can just sit behind a computer and get radicalized. That's the problem. The exposure, you can't stop anything. What does the state do? So, I'm just as a touch wood. I mean, I don't know where this is going to go. And you see, success, which is right now what the Islamic State is, they are capturing more territory. They seem to be winning the war. But we know that these are only short-term successes which cannot possibly last. But the youth can get carried away. And so there is a danger. There is a danger for everybody. India cannot be complacent if only 7 people are gone. In fact, I would not be surprised if more people are gone, but we don't know. That's also possible.
I think there's more than 7 from here. One Indian came here, took his family and went there.
Yeah, I know.
But there's a dialogue going on between Singapore government and the Muslim leaders here. Quite reported.
That's the right approach.
But do you have a similar approach by state government or the central
State
government?
government.
State government.
Central government is at the moment not very Muslim friendly, so it has to be the state
Not
government.
yet.
They wouldn't actually, find it difficult to do that. Although the Home Minister himself has gone public on it. But the fact is that all these things are not done, really speaking, in the public domain. This would be actually conversation which takes place between political leadership of the public slate. That this is what is happening, you better be watchful, you better talk to your... I mean, this is how it's done. If you go public, then actually there will be a reaction to it.
Yeah.
Jim?
Yeah.
Thank you, Lieutenant General. 2 quick questions. First, on the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, to what extent do you think has it had an alienating effect? And secondly, you touched on how drones have become a principal counter-terrorism tool for the US in Afghanistan and Pakistan. I wanted to hear your thoughts on how they can be used and how they have been used in the Indian theatre for surveillance, etc. A lot of times you've heard in the Northeast, they could have been used better to prevent attacks against CRPF forces, etc. So perhaps if you could share a little bit on that.
What's your name?
Jayant Singh, I'm a researcher.
Okay,
here at
right.
NSF.
Firstly, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act actually gives two things which the armed forces require to operate. One is they require operational freedom. Two, they require legal protection. So it is on the basis of these two requirements of the armed forces that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act have come into being, and it's being used by the armed forces. But over a period of time, the larger public narrative has been, and this has been aided by forces which are inimical to the state, but whatever it is, the larger understood public narrative is that this legal instrument is being misused by the armed forces to carry out a whole lot of human rights violations. Firstly, I would like to, as a former person who has commanded a battalion, a brigade, a division, been in charge of, I would like to disabuse you of this notion that this vilifying of the Indian Army, that it misuses and carries out human rights violations in the state of J&K or anywhere else, is completely wrong. As an institution, whenever there is something which is brought to our notice, action is always taken. We are not saying that our men do not commit it. But when it's done, it's not done institutionally, it is done as an individual action. And for those of you who know, who put armed men into a situation like this, the type of command and control which can be exercised, and when you have so many people out there, you don't know who does what. But you can't blame the institution as much. If you blame it, if the institution has taken no action, you look at the figures officially put out of the type of complaints made against the armed forces, type of action which has been taken, and whatever has been done. And you will find that the Indian Army, it's not that we have been perfect, we are not perfect. But I'm telling you, if you look at the size of the Indian Army and it's used against its own people, there is no army in the world which has the least amounts of human rights violation other than the Indian Army. We don't see what the American Army does in Afghanistan and the innocent people that they kill. We don't see it because they control the media, and they do it actually from a distance of a couple of kilometers in the air. And there is no voice in Afghanistan which actually brings it out, except one which is not heard. You don't see about other armies which do it. You don't see the Pakistani army doing it. They don't allow the media to go. They use air power. And your question about using drones. Indian Army would never use drones or air power against its own. We have never done it. The only time when we use artillery, maybe once or twice, is on the line of control. When a whole group of militants are actually holed up in the mountains. That's probably when we use it, when we know there's nobody else there. We use force very measured. It's part of our doctrine. We are very careful. But we are not perfect. When using force, it's a blunt instrument. Collateral damage takes place. We kill innocents. But we normally accept that we have done so. And then we have to, only thing we can do is to compensate. So the Armed Forces Special Powers Act was used to vilify the Indian Army as being a violator of human rights. So it became what you call a political issue. Now, there is a lady in one of our states who's been fasting for the last, I think now, 8 to 10 years, saying that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act should be actually be drawn. We had a committee to review, and it was called the Justice Jeevan Reddy Committee, who looked into this issue. Does the armed forces require this? They came up with a recommendation which says that we can do away with the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, but these two things which the armed forces require, which is operational freedom and legal protection, should be given to them through another legal instrument. So what they really did was they said, okay, since the act is now a political pariah, let's knock that off, but let's give them something else. But due to certain legal issues within that document, the armed forces have not agreed to it. But I personally feel, and as a military advisor, at least it was my point of view, that the legal issues which they are raising, and I don't want to get into those details, are some things which are really, we can actually resolve it, and we can actually do away with the Armed Forces Special Powers Act and give them some other legal instrument for their protection. So I'm not in favor that we don't need to scrap it. I'm in favor of the fact that we need to scrap it because it has become a political pariah. You know, people believe that we are misusing it, and you can't just take away that belief. The only way to do it is just take away the act, but give these two things. You can't expect a soldier to function in an environment without giving him legal protection. Which means that if a soldier goes and arrests somebody and tomorrow he'll have to face the court if he doesn't have the protection. For the rest of his life, he'll be going to court. And if you know the Indian judicial system, it'll take 10 to 15 years to solve a case. How can the state allow that to happen to a soldier? So the legal protection is required. Operational freedom is something which we ourselves try and curb, depending upon the type of the state of the militancy. We can always, through army, just use who decides who gets what freedom. That can always be done. So it's not something which I would say that the Armed Forces Special Powers should remain. I would think that it should be disposed of and something else should be put in place. And as far as the drones are concerned, we could use drones for surveillance.
Yeah, I was asking.
You know, for surveillance. But let me answer. I'll give you an answer to that surveillance issue. You know, most of these things which they've been asking to do it, most of these guys are operating in the jungles of India. The problem with actually drones is they can't penetrate the jungles. And the jungles not only have militants, they also have tribals not only living there, also moving around there. So if you look at these drones, they can probably give you IR images of human movement which is there, but they can't give you an identification of whether he's an innocent tribal or he's a militant with a gun. That cannot be done. So there is, you can say, it is not the answer to the problem. If I will just narrate to you. The first time we used drones in the state of J&K was when I was a Major General commanding a division. I had an airfield, an IAF airfield next to my headquarters, so I was in very good liaison with them. So when the drones came there first, I liaisoned with them and I was carrying out an operation in a valley. I said, why don't you give us the drones? So they said, okay, we can't show it as a operational flight because they're just still coming. They're not fully operational. We'll show it as a training flight. So we tied up and we used these guys who we said we suspect a particular area. It was winter. Can we just fly over that area and see if there's any movement? They did. For a couple of days they did. Then they came back to us and said that so-and-so place. They gave us an 8-figure grid reference. They said, we find there is some probably presence of human beings. It's in the middle of winter, in the middle of a forest. Apparently there must be militants. So we launched our special forces, I remember. They went there at about 3 o'clock in the night, using their GPS, climbed up the mountain, reached there. When they finally got to the place, they realized actually there were a lot of dung there. There were a lot of animals there. And the drone, which actually uses the IR, cannot differentiate between animals and people. So, this technology as a solution to militancy is something which we should take it with a pinch of salt. It can be, you can say, it can supplement something else, but let's not think that, it's going to be very effective. And not in the jungles of India, I find it that they have their problems. It has not worked very well with us.
Thank you. Any other questions? Maybe I use the prerogative as a chair to ask 2 questions.
Yeah.
The first question, if you read a lot of the counter terrorism literature. I mean, most of it, I mean, you are a practitioner, you did stuff. A lot of academics who write about counter-terrorism. At the end of the day, it becomes a bit unsatisfactory because they come down to one thing, winning hearts and minds, which in a sense is so obvious, there's no point saying it. But my point is, and it sort of speaks to what you were trying to say, that we need, like you say, we need to reach out to, in this case, the Muslim community, right? But we also need to reach out to other communities as well, because what's happening is, and that's not talked about as much, but what's happening is, as the fringes of other communities see what's happening, they are the ones, for example, the UK, for example, the rise of the UKIP, for example, in the UK, the rise of the National Front in France, throughout Europe. These are the communities that have not been engaged at all. The state has concentrated on the Muslim communities, and accusations of appeasement have come about. So I just wanted to hear about, what do you think about the other side? I mean, because in India, that's what people say, right? Nehru was an appeaser, he appeased the Muslims, that's what happened. It's a particular discourse that comes through India, that's one. So secondly, sir, you touched on something really interesting. I just hope maybe you can elaborate a bit. Some people say that the civilian legal system that we have is inadequate to deal with terrorism. The Americans, of course, have Guantanamo Bay to deal with that situation. The British have suspended some very basic liberties, again, on the basis that what we know as a civilian legal system is not suited to deal with this particular type of combatants. I wanted to hear what you thought about that. Just to this question.
You're absolutely right. You can't just deal with one end of the affected party, because in all cases there is a reaction. And let's look at the Indian case itself. The reaction actually to Muslim or Islamic extremism was the rise of what do you call parties, which finally the Samjauta blast, which is a train going to Pakistan in 2008, bombs were blasted and a lot of people were killed, and the one which is in Malegaon were clear-cut examples. And then we found out that they were actually people who were reacting to what they saw was that the government was not doing enough. So we have to now sort out these guys. See, India is one state which has actually felt a neighbor. Pakistan has been trying for the last several decades to see how it can actually set fire to what they call our communal fault line, to get the Hindus to fight the Muslims. This has been the Pakistanis. If you look at the thing of a 1,000 cuts, it's all about this. And we ourselves know, having been through a terrible partition, we also know that that is also a weak point. That if the Hindus and the Muslims start fighting to the other, India will find it difficult to exist. And that is why our constitution makers has made us a secular country. And that secularism has held, even in spite of the onslaught against it. So, the reaction which you're talking about is what also you have to watch. And that is why when he asked the question whether the Modi government coming to power, is this now going to get worse? It is a genuine question. Indians are asking it. It is not that we are unaware. They are watching it. But they won't let it happen, I can assure you. That is the resilience of the state. So I agree with what you do. It just cannot be just one community, because other communities are actually wanting to react. Yeah, whether the normal laws are sufficient to deal with terrorism. I think each state will have to decide this. And we had this Prevention of Terrorism Act, which no longer actually is there. We've got other instruments which is but Prevention of Terrorism Act went on for some time. As usual, all these acts, there's nothing wrong in the Armed Forces Special Powers Act or the it is in how they are used. Jayalalitha, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, the former Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, used it against her political opponents. Put them in jail. So it was misused, and all these acts have been misused. And therefore, finally, Pota has no longer been there. But that doesn't mean that the Indian state does not have other acts in place. There are other acts in place, and they are required. Because you're dealing with people who, if you let go with the normal system, they will actually go and create further mayhem and loss of life. You do not have the proof to tell the judge that this is what it is. So the judge will say, according to the law, show me proof. So you need a law which actually, at least you can keep him for about 30 days before you can find out what it is. So each state defines for itself. And they are required. The point is, what is the checks and balances the state has to ensure that they are not misused, because all of them are amenable to misuse. And if we know human beings who have to finally act on this, somebody will sort out his personal problem, his personal vendetta against somebody and put in jail. The Chief Minister did it quite openly against her political opponents.
Thank you. Any Surya?
Yeah, you started off saying something about the Pakistan-inspired terrorism in India.
Surya?
Yeah, you started off by talking of a particular instance of Pakistan-inspired potential terrorist activity. What's really happening on the border right now with Pakistan? You know, given your experience of having served in J&K, there are instances of firing apparently from both sides along the international boundary in addition to the LOC. Is there any particularly significant activity on the part of Pakistan, as you see it, to try and get more people infiltrated into India, or is it something else? And secondly, this is not related to counterterrorism. Could you say something about what could be the nature and scope of the modern strike force which India wants to raise with reference to China? Thank you.
Right. The first question to just, for the last, and this is one of the longest of the ceasefire violations which have been continuing, not only on the line of control is actually the disputed area, it's now spread to the international boundary, what we call the IB. And I'm frankly far away from the spot. I used to be in the midst of all this, wondering as to why the hell are we firing and why are they firing at us. And all the time it was, they fired first and we will tell them, and they'll tell us that you fired first. And the same story continues. In my view, this is a useless exchange of energy. It's something which political decision makers on both sides needs to put a halt to, because here are two military forces eyeball to eyeball who cannot be allowed to have a free rein on trying to sort out themselves. Because in a situation like this, neither can we stop the Pakistanis from firing, neither can they stop us from firing. So technically and theoretically speaking, we can continue to fire for several months. We will have a lot of people killed, we will waste a lot of ammunition. But I don't think whether these are what the two countries want. So I find it very difficult to understand as to why there is no political talks taking place to bring it to a halt if the military guys cannot sort it out. I really find it difficult to understand, and I don't have an explanation for it. And since I am away from the spot, I am in no position to know as to what is really taking place. So I really cannot say, except to make a comment that this is a useless exchange of energy. Neither can India win this, neither can Pakistan win. Both are losers. Both will kill. Eventually now we have started killing civilians on both sides because they are unprotected. And we can't protect them. And if you look at the demography of IB on both the sides, the amount of civilians who are there You can't move all of them out. So, sanity would actually would demand that some sort of an intervention takes place at whatever level to bring it to a halt. Otherwise, there's no reason why it should continue. So that's my point of view. But as I said, I'm away from the scene, so I'm just making a theoretical argument about it. I don't know what's happening on the ground. And once you don't know what's happening on the ground, actually you shouldn't be talking about it. So, the Mountain Strike Corps. Mountain Strike Corps, for those of you who do not know, India is planning to raise a Mountain Strike Corps with about a total of about nearly 90,000 total people. It is supposed to be India's answer to the developments in Tibet, and it's meant to improve our military wherewithal. Personally speaking, I think it's an idea which really needs to be questioned. Firstly, purely from an operational point of view, there's no way that you can use a corps of 90,000 people integrated in any manner to capture some part of territory across the Himalayas, because the terrain and the infrastructure on our side won't allow it. In the mountains, you not only have to put an army to capture, but you have to support it logistically afterwards. It's not feasible, therefore, operationally to use that Mountain Strike Corps. Be that as it may. I would think that if you really want to what we really need, and the argument that we need troops against the Chinese to be increased is not questionable. I would think a Mountain Strike Corps with 2 infantry divisions and 2 armored brigades, and I have not been able to figure out what these armored brigades are going to do, but let's leave that out. How are they going to play out in the Himalayas? But let's leave that out. I would think two infantry divisions themselves are insufficient. We require probably 4 infantry divisions. What we really need to do, therefore, if you're going to raise this, then what is going to happen is we're going to need a lot of money to support it. As you know, India is going through a fiscal crisis. We are trying to shrink all our budgets. And therefore, if you're going to raise this corps, which they are, they're going to take money from the rest of the system, rest of the military system. You've got to cut and bring it here. But I think the better idea would be to actually rebalance from the West against Pakistan towards China, because that is a bigger threat. And most of the Indian armed forces, because of historical reasons and the legacy of Pakistan's wars with us, is 60 to 70% of combat power is towards the West. We need to rebalance towards the North, which can be done. But I've tried doing it in my previous job and I've failed to do so, although I still continue to persuade that we can still do it. So this idea of a Mountain Strike Corps, as far as I'm concerned, is not a good one at all.
It's the second person I hear saying the same thing from ISS podium.
Who was the first?
Uday Bhaskar.
Yeah, he's a Navy man. Because the Navy feels that, if they're going to raise, the Army is going to raise a Mountain Strike Corps, then what will happen to the Navies? But that's also my argument. See, the strategic argument is that the Chinese are not going to resolve our boundary dispute with them. They would like to keep it as a pressure point. They would like India to waste as much resources as possible on its northern border. So it will not free us to develop what we are really going to do in any case, which is our maritime and naval capability. That's the capability by which India will that's a capability India can project, at least to keep the sea lanes open, if not for anything else. But the Chinese wouldn't want that to happen, actually. So one of the things to do is to keep us spending money on the northern border. If I were the Chinese, I would do that. I don't know what the Chinese are doing.
Now, how would then the military feel? I mean, given that China and India are moving towards commerce, trade, and bilateral, so-called, big developments. See, how do you people, when the armed forces at the top, people feel about it? I mean, on one side you're being bashed up, or you're fighting ever ready with the weather.
I don't think that the armed forces, at least the Indian armed forces, India's armed forces are meant to prevent war. In that war prevention, we have to learn to fight. That's a different matter. But we see ourselves that in India's stage of development, we require peace. We require economic development. We require more economic engagement with all the economic powers of the world, China included. And therefore, just because they have a military capability and we are developing ours, we don't have a problem about economic engagement. In fact, that economic engagement will fuel our military capability. You can't have a military capability without a booming economy. And therefore, a booming economy for India in the globalized world is about engagement. So we quite understand that. We have no problem with that at all. In fact, our experience with the Chinese, even on the northern borders, is that whatever they do, we stand up against them, and finally they go back and we go back, and that's it. So far, we have not let them get away with any ground. We have not given any ground. And we are sure we will not. Because we think we have the capability to do that. So we don't have any problem at all with the Indian government actually increasing its engagement. China is India's largest trading partner for that matter. We don't have a problem. In fact, we would like actually, even with the Pakistanis, that trade relations grow. We have no intentions of fighting a war with Pakistan just because we want to fight a war with Pakistan. Indian army is not there for fighting wars. Indian army is there to do the bidding of the state. The state requires peace. And if that peace is to be done by a strong defense, then we are part of that.
Thank you, General. Any last questions? No? I would just like to thank General Menon for the very interesting talk. I've listened to a lot of talks on counterterrorism. Normally I fall asleep halfway through. I must say with yours, I'm very interested. I think your range of experience, and also I think the fact that you managed to talk about you say you didn't talk about the definitional issues, but I think you engaged them sufficiently enough. I'm now left with a very happy task of presenting a small token of appreciation from ISIS. Very aptly, the top book is called More Than Maoism. It's about political Maoist insurgencies in South Asia. So thank you again, General. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
I invite everybody outside for tea and coffee, please. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Very interesting.